I never told my family that my tech investment firm generates over $286,000 a month. So when I showed up at my parents' $3 million mansion in Maryland, wearing faded jeans and casually joked that I had just lost my job, I thought they might offer me a warm meal. Instead, my own mother physically blocked the front door. She shoved a crumpled $50 bill into my chest and told me to go find a cheap motel because she would not let me become a financial burden to my older sister. I stood on the porch watching the heavy mahogany door slam shut in my face, and I just smiled. They refused to carry me for a single night, but they had absolutely no idea that for the past 5 years, I was the one who secretly bought that mansion, and I was the one carrying this entire family on my back. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The late afternoon sun was reflecting off the pristine windows of the sprawling estate in Prince George County, Maryland. It was an exclusive neighborhood known for housing the most affluent Black families in the state. I paid my driver and stepped out onto the perfectly paved driveway. At 32 years old, I had spent the last decade building a cybersecurity venture capital fund in Silicon Valley from the ground up. My days were filled with board meetings, aggressive acquisitions, and managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio. But to my family, I was still just the disappointing younger daughter who wasted her time staring at computer screens. I had not visited them in over a year. The distance was intentional. Growing up in a house where my older sister Vanessa was treated like absolute royalty had taught me to keep my walls high. But today, I decided to test the waters. I deliberately left my designer clothes and expensive jewelry back in California. I wore a plain gray hoodie, faded denim jeans, and scuffed sneakers. I wanted to see if the people who brought me into this world could love me just for being their daughter, or if their affection was still strictly tied to perceived status. I walked up the sweeping stone steps and rang the ornate doorbell. A few moments later, the heavy mahogany door swung open. My mother, Brenda, stood in the doorway. She was 58 years old, but spent a small fortune maintaining the appearance of a woman 10 years younger. She was already dressed in a tailored silk evening gown, her hair professionally styled, and a heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. They were clearly preparing for a major event. Her polite hostess smile vanished the exact second her eyes registered my outfit. "Kiara," she said, her voice dropping an octave as she looked me up and down with obvious distaste. "What are you doing here looking like a homeless person? We are hosting a very important investment gala tonight." I forced a tired smile, rubbing the back of my neck to play the part. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone soft. "I know I should have called first, but things have been really rough. My company had a massive round of layoffs yesterday. I lost my job. I had to give up my apartment. I just needed a place to stay for a few days to figure things out." I expected a gasp of sympathy. I expected a motherly instinct to kick in. I expected her to open the door and invite me inside out of the evening chill. Instead, she physically stepped forward, wedging her body into the doorframe to block my entry. Her jaw clenched tight and her eyes turned as cold as ice. "Are you kidding me?" my mother hissed, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if my failure might somehow infect the pristine interior of her home. "You drove all the way from California just to dump your problems on our doorstep. I told your father that your ridiculous computer degrees would lead to nothing. I told him you should have learned how to build a personal brand like your sister." "Mom, I just need a bed for the night," I pleaded gently, testing how far her cruelty would go. "I have nothing left." My mother scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the quiet neighborhood. "You have nothing left because you have no ambition, Kiara. You always lacked the drive that Vanessa has. Do you have any idea how hard your sister works to maintain this lifestyle for us? She bought this $3 million house for your father and me. She pays the bills. She is hosting a massive fundraising event tonight to secure millions for a new real estate development. This house cannot carry another burden right now." She reached into her expensive leather clutch and dug around aggressively. She pulled out a crumpled $50 bill and shoved it forcefully into the center of my chest. "Take this and call a cab." she ordered, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. Go find a cheap motel in the city. Do not come back here and embarrass us in front of the guests tonight. This family survives on Vanessa's money, and I will not let you become a financial anchor dragging your sister down. I looked down at the wrinkled green paper resting against my gray hoodie. A $50 bill. That was the exact value my mother placed on my well-being. That was the price she was willing to pay to get rid of her youngest daughter. I slowly looked back up at her perfectly contoured face. Are you actually kicking me out, Mom? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. I am protecting my family, my mother replied, lifting her chin defensively. Goodbye, Kiara. Call us when you actually have your life together. She did not wait for a response. She stepped back and slammed the heavy door shut. The loud click of the deadbolt locking echoed across the porch. I stood there alone on the stone steps, listening to the silence of the affluent neighborhood. I slowly folded the $50 bill and slipped it into the pocket of my jeans. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a single ounce of heartbreak. Instead, a deep, cold sense of absolute clarity washed over me. I had finally received the answer I was looking for. My mother had just kicked me out of the mansion she believed Vanessa had purchased. She bragged about Vanessa's money and Vanessa's hard work. She believed she was fiercely protecting the golden child's empire. But she was entirely wrong, because Vanessa was a fraud. She had never bought this house. She had never paid a single bill for this family. Every single brick of this massive estate, every drop of electricity they used, and every bite of food they ate was paid for by a blind trust. A trust that I had created. I turned around and looked down the long paved driveway just as a sleek white Porsche turned off the main road and started heading toward the house. The golden child was arriving, and I was more than ready to watch her perfect little world burn to the ground. The sleek white Porsche Cayenne swerved into the circular driveway, stopping with an obnoxious screech of its tires. I recognized the rental agency sticker faintly visible on the lower corner of the windshield. Vanessa and Liam could not even afford to buy their own luxury vehicle, but they certainly knew how to put on a theatrical show for the neighbors. I watched as the engine idled for a moment before the driver's side door swung open. Liam stepped out first. He was a tall white man with slicked back hair wearing a cheap navy blue suit that he undoubtedly thought made him look like a powerful Wall Street executive. In reality, he was a failed commercial real estate broker who spent significantly more time updating his social media profiles than actually closing any properties. He walked around the front of the vehicle, adjusting his tie with an arrogant swagger that was entirely unearned. Then the passenger door opened and my older sister emerged. Vanessa was 34 years old and styled herself as an elite lifestyle coach and wellness influencer. She stepped out of the luxury SUV wearing a vibrant emerald green cocktail dress and impossibly high stiletto heels. Her hair was flawlessly styled into voluminous waves, and she carried a designer handbag that I immediately recognized as a very clever counterfeit from a recent trip she took to a discount market. But to the untrained eyes of her internet followers, she looked exactly like a self-made millionaire. Vanessa paused by the car adjusting her oversized sunglasses before her gaze finally landed on me standing near the porch. The smug, confident smile she always wore faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated disgust. She slowly lowered her sunglasses, peering over the rims to look me up and down. She took in my faded jeans, my plain gray hoodie, and my scuffed sneakers with a visible sneer. Well, 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 Vanessa said, her voice dripping with thick condescension as she strutted up the paved walkway. Look exactly what the cat dragged in. I thought I smelled the distinct scent of failure lingering on the front porch. What in the world are you doing here, Kiara? Did you finally realize that typing on a computer all day in a dark room does not make you a real businesswoman? I kept my hands buried deep in the pockets of my hoodie, my fingers brushing against the crisp edges of the $50 bill my mother had just shoved at me. I was fired, Vanessa, I said, repeating the lie with a perfectly calm and defeated tone. My tech company had a massive round of unexpected layoffs yesterday. I lost my apartment. I just came to ask Mom and Dad if I could crash in my old bedroom for a few days until I figure things out. Vanessa let out a sharp, cruel laugh, throwing her head back theatrically, as if I had just told the funniest joke in the world. Your old bedroom, she mocked, stepping closer to me, so the heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume washed over me. Kiara, this is not the cramped little suburban house we grew up in. This is my house. I bought this $3 million estate to give our parents the luxurious life they truly deserve. I am the one who pays the massive property taxes. I am the one who maintains the manicured landscaping. You do not get to just show up here looking like a homeless beggar and expect me to welcome you into my sanctuary with open arms. Liam walked up the stone steps, coming to stand right next to his wife. He wrapped a highly protective arm around her waist, puffing out his chest to assert his dominance. He looked down at me with an expression of absolute superiority and contempt. You really have some nerve showing up today of all days, Kiara, Liam said, shaking his head in exaggerated mock pity. Vanessa and I are hosting a private investment gala tonight. We have some of the wealthiest property developers and angel investors in the entire state of Maryland arriving in less than 3 hours. We are securing critical seed funding for my new commercial real estate venture. The absolute last thing we need is you hovering around the catered appetizers, reminding everyone that there is a failure clinging to the family skirts. I looked at Liam, suppressing the intense urge to laugh right in his smug face. He was actually lecturing me about seed funding and angel investors. He had absolutely no idea that I ran a cybersecurity venture capital firm that managed over $400 million in assets. He had no idea that the wealthy investors he was so desperately trying to impress tonight would probably beg for a 5-minute pitch meeting with me back in Silicon Valley. But here he was, a broke man in a cheap suit standing on my driveway, telling me that I was a failure, clinging to his coattails. It is a strictly black tie event, Kiara, Vanessa added, inspecting her perfectly manicured fingernails as if looking at me was too exhausting. We have catered beluga caviar and imported vintage champagne. I have spent weeks carefully curating the guest list to make sure Liam gets the exact high-level exposure he needs to launch his new fund. If our guests see you walking around looking like a washed-up tech support worker, it will completely ruin the sophisticated aesthetic of the evening. You are simply bad for our brand. Our brand! That was the obnoxious phrase Vanessa used to justify everything she did. She treated our entire family like a continuous marketing campaign where she was the premium star product and I was the defective merchandise they had to hide in the back warehouse. She had built her massive online following by posting daily photos of the marble kitchen, the grand staircase, and the heated swimming pool of this mansion, claiming it was all the fruit of her relentless daily grinding and spiritual manifesting. Her thousands of followers worshipped her online persona. Our parents worshipped her supposed financial success. I really have nowhere else to go. Vanessa, I said, letting my shoulders slump a little further to play the pathetic victim role they both expected and desired. Just one single night. I promise I will stay completely out of the way. I will not even come upstairs during your fancy party. Liam scoffed, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. Absolutely not. He snapped, his voice harsh and dismissive. You are a massive liability, Kiara. You always have been. You never understood how to network or how to properly present yourself in high society. If you stay, you will just bring down the positive energy of the house. We need an atmosphere of absolute undeniable success tonight. Wealth attracts wealth. And frankly speaking, you look like pure poverty. I stared directly into the eyes of Liam, memorizing his exact cruel words. He was standing on the custom-imported stone driveway that I had personally paid $70,000 to have installed just last summer. He was leaning against a rented luxury car that he most likely put on a high-interest credit card he could barely afford. He was the very definition of fake, fragile wealth, talking down to the actual silent owner of the ground he was currently standing on. Vanessa sighed dramatically, placing a delicate hand on the chest of Liam, as if she had to calm his righteous anger down. Honey, do not waste your valuable breath on her, Vanessa said softly, before turning her cold, calculating eyes back to me. You heard my husband, Kiara. We do not have any room for you, not in this beautiful house, and certainly not in our lives right now. Go call an Uber to take you back to the city. If you do not have the money on your phone, I am sure you can manage to walk to a public bus stop." She turned around, her vibrant emerald dress flowing elegantly behind her, and linked her arm tightly through the arm of Liam. They began walking up the remaining stone steps toward the massive front doors, completely ignoring my presence, as if I had simply ceased to exist. They fully expected me to simply turn around, hang my head in shame, and walk away into the fading afternoon sun. They expected me to accept my designated place at the absolute bottom of their imaginary social hierarchy without a single word of protest. But I did not move a single inch. I stood exactly where I was on the porch, waiting for the final piece of the toxic family puzzle to make his grand appearance. Because the heavy mahogany front door was about to open once again, and I knew for a fact that my father would never ever miss an opportunity to play the benevolent, powerful patriarch in front of his favorite golden daughter. The heavy mahogany door clicked and slowly swung open for the second time. My father Harrison stood in the grand entryway. At 60 years old, he still possessed the imposing physical presence of a former college athlete, but his posture was heavily curated to project the image of an elder statesman. He wore a custom-tailored linen suit and a vintage Rolex that I knew for a fact was purchased using the exact same anonymous trust fund that paid the mortgage on this house. He looked down at me from the elevated threshold, his expression a carefully practiced mixture of paternal disappointment and performative grace. "I heard the commotion from my study," my father said, his deep baritone voice echoing slightly in the vast foyer. He always spoke as if he were addressing a crowded auditorium, even when it was just his own family. "Your mother was right to turn you away, Kiara. You cannot simply vanish for over a year, ignore our phone calls, and then show up on our doorstep demanding shelter the moment your little computer career falls apart. We warned you about the volatility of the tech industry. We told you to pursue a stable, respectable profession like law or medicine. But you were always too stubborn to listen to my guidance." I kept my head bowed slightly, playing the part of the broken, defeated daughter to absolute perfection. "I know, Dad," I said, letting a fake tremor enter my voice. "I made a mistake. I just need a place to sleep tonight. I will be out of your hair first thing in the morning." My father sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose as if my very existence was a heavy burden he was forced to bear. He glanced back over his shoulder into the foyer. Vanessa and Liam were standing near the sweeping marble staircase watching the exchange with thinly veiled amusement. My father looked back at me, his chest puffing out slightly as he prepared to deliver his grand magnanimous ruling. "I am a man of faith and a man of family," my father announced, adopting a tone of noble sacrifice. "I will not turn my own flesh and blood away into the night, no matter how profoundly you have disappointed me. You may stay here for exactly one night. There is a small storage room in the unfinished section of the basement. It is cold and there is no proper bed, but there is a cot you can use. You will stay down there out of sight, and you will leave before the sun comes up tomorrow. I do not want the neighbors seeing you walking down our driveway looking like a vagrant." "Thank you," I whispered, keeping my eyes glued to the expensive stone porch. "But there is a condition," my father added, his voice hardening into a sharp, authoritative edge. "Nothing in this world is free, Kiara. You have coasted on your youthful arrogance for far too long. If you want the protection of this roof tonight, you are going to earn it." Vanessa has spent months organizing this investment gala. She has invited the most powerful real estate moguls in Maryland to help Liam launch his new fund. The catering company she hired is short-staffed, and they desperately need extra hands to serve the VIP guests. He reached over to a small mahogany bench in the entryway and picked up a folded piece of black fabric. He held it out toward me, allowing it to unroll. It was a cheap, stiff polyester catering uniform, complete with a white waist apron. "You are going to put this on my father," instructed, pushing the uniform into my hands. "You are going to serve champagne, clear the appetizer plates, and assist the catering staff in the kitchen. You will keep your head down, you will not speak to any of the guests, and you will absolutely not mention to anyone that you are related to us. If anyone asks, you are just a temporary hire from the staffing agency. Do you understand me, Kiara? You will work to pay for your room and board tonight. I looked down at the cheap, scratchy uniform resting in my hands. The irony of the situation was almost suffocating. I was a millionaire CEO who controlled a massive Silicon Valley venture capital fund. I earned more money in a single month than Liam had seen in his entire miserable life. I was the actual legal owner of the $3 million mansion we were standing in. And my father was forcing me to wear a maid's uniform to serve drinks in my own house, just to earn a night on a dusty cot in my own basement. From the foyer, Vanessa let out a soft, cruel chuckle. "It is actually perfect, Daddy," she called out, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "It will be a good character-building exercise for her. It is about time Kiara learned what real hard work looks like. Plus, she finally gets to contribute something useful to this family for once." I slowly looked up from the uniform and met my father's gaze. I did not argue. I did not defend my dignity or throw my wealth in their faces. I simply nodded, my face a mask of complete submission. "I understand, Dad," I said softly. "I will do whatever you need me to do. Thank you for the opportunity." My father smiled, a tight, self-satisfied smile. He truly believed he was teaching me a profound lesson about humility and respect. "Good," he said, stepping back to clear the doorway. "Use the side entrance by the kitchen to go down to the basement. The catering manager will give you your assignments. Do not embarrass us tonight, Kiara." I walked past him, stepping over the threshold and into the grand foyer of the mansion. The interior was breathtaking. Towering ceilings imported crystal chandeliers and pristine white marble floors. Every single piece of furniture, every piece of modern art hanging on the walls, and every expensive rug under my feet had been paid for by my anonymous trust fund. I had wired the money to a shell corporation, which then purchased the property and allowed my parents to live here rent-free. They thought Vanessa was their savior. They thought I was a pathetic failure. I walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen, keeping my head down as catering staff rushed past me carrying trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. I found the heavy wooden door that led down to the basement and descended the narrow wooden stairs into the damp, unfinished storage room. It was dark and smelled faintly of mildew. There was a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling and a flimsy canvas cot pushed into the corner. I set my small overnight bag on the floor and stripped off my gray hoodie. I pulled the stiff black polyester dress over my head and tied the white apron tightly around my waist. I walked over to a small cracked mirror leaning against the concrete wall and stared at my reflection. I looked exactly like a minimum wage servant. I looked invisible. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out the crumpled $50 bill my mother had given me. I smoothed it out and placed it carefully on the edge of the cot. I smiled a cold, calculated smile that did not reach my eyes. My father thought he was punishing me. Vanessa thought she was humiliating me. Liam thought he was asserting his dominance. But by forcing me into this uniform, they had handed me the absolute perfect disguise. They had given me a front-row ticket to their fraudulent gala. They had given me the ability to walk among their wealthy investors, listen to their lies, and watch them build their fragile house of cards higher and higher. I adjusted the white apron and smoothed back my hair. The trap was officially set. It was time to go upstairs and serve my family exactly what they deserved. The evening arrived faster than I expected and brought with it the absolute elite of Prince George County. By 7 o'clock, the grand driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. The quiet mansion transformed into a bustling hub of high society networking. I stood in the massive gourmet kitchen, helping the catering staff arrange delicate crab cakes and truffles onto silver platters. The catering manager, a stressed woman named Sylvia, barely even looked at my face when she shoved a heavy tray of crystal champagne flutes into my hands. She told me to circulate through the main living room, keep my mouth shut, and keep the glasses full. I nodded obediently, slipping out the swinging kitchen doors and entering the lion den. The main living room was a spectacle of excessive wealth and desperate ambition. Soft jazz music floated through the air, mixing with the clinking of glasses and the loud, confident laughter of people who desperately wanted to be seen. I walked silently across the imported Persian rugs, holding the silver tray perfectly steady. It was fascinating how invisible you become the moment you put on a uniform. I was a successful black woman walking through a room full of other wealthy black professionals, but because I was wearing a cheap polyester apron, their eyes simply slid right past me. I was just part of the furniture, a convenient hand offering them alcohol. They took the glasses without looking at my face, without saying thank you, and without ever realizing that the woman serving them could buy and sell every single person in that room. I moved methodically through the crowd, observing my family in their natural habitat. My father was standing near the grand fireplace, holding a glass of scotch and laughing loudly with a group of older businessmen. He was playing the role of the proud patriarch, perfectly accepting their compliments about the beautiful estate. My mother was floating between groups of wives, pointing out the custom architectural details of the ceiling and bragging about the expensive interior designer she claimed she hired. They looked so happy. They looked completely oblivious to the fact that their entire reality was a carefully constructed illusion funded by the daughter they had just banished to the basement. I continued my rounds, swapping empty glasses for full ones, until I spotted Liam. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, cornering a man I immediately recognized as a prominent commercial developer from Baltimore. Liam was sweating slightly, his cheap suit looking even worse under the expensive ambient lighting. He was waving his hands frantically, talking a mile a minute about zoning laws and projected returns. The developer looked profoundly bored, checking his watch every few seconds. Liam was completely out of his depth. He was a Shark Tank guppy, trying to swim with apex predators. I smoothly walked past them, allowing the developer to grab a glass of champagne, giving him a brief excuse to turn away from Liam. Liam glared at me in annoyance, completely failing to recognize the face of his own sister-in-law. But the main event of the evening was taking place in the center of the room. Vanessa had positioned herself perfectly under the massive crystal chandelier, holding court with a circle of incredibly wealthy private investors. She had changed into an even more extravagant gown, a deep burgundy silk that commanded attention. She was holding a flute of champagne, gesturing gracefully as she spoke. I adjusted my grip on the silver tray and slowly drifted toward her circle, keeping my head bowed just enough to blend into the background. I stopped a few feet away, pretending to organize the napkins on my tray so I could listen to every single word. I just knew I had to give back to the people who raised me. Vanessa was saying, her voice projecting perfectly so everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear her. She placed a hand gracefully over her heart, looking around at the investors with an expression of deep manufactured humility. When my lifestyle brand really took off, and my coaching business broke the 7-figure mark, my first thought was my parents. They sacrificed so much for me. So I decided to surprise them. I found this beautiful $3 million estate, and I bought it for them outright. No mortgage, no stress, just a gift from a grateful daughter. A murmur of profound admiration rippled through the circle of investors. One older woman wearing a massive diamond ring shook her head in awe. "That is incredibly beautiful, Vanessa," the woman said. "To have that kind of financial liquidity at your age is remarkable. You truly are a visionary businesswoman. It is no wonder Liam wants you as a partner in his new real estate fund." Vanessa smiled modestly, taking a small sip of her champagne. "Well, it takes a lot of late nights and early mornings," Vanessa replied smoothly. "You have to be willing to outwork everyone else in the room. You have to manifest your success and never let dead weight drag you down. I always say, you are only as successful as the people you carry with you, and I refuse to carry anyone who does not match my work ethic." I stood there listening to her steal my life story with absolute flawless execution. She was taking credit for the grueling 80-hour work weeks I spent building my cybersecurity firm. She was taking credit for the millions of dollars in venture capital I had secured through sheer brilliance and relentless determination. She was taking credit for the exact house I was currently standing in. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. She had built an entire empire of influence by pretending to be me. I stepped closer into the circle, extending my silver tray toward her group. Champagne, ma'am? I asked, keeping my voice soft and deferential. Vanessa did not even look at me. She blindly reached out her manicured fingers, brushing against mine as she grabbed a fresh flute from the tray. Keep them coming, she ordered, waving me away with a flick of her wrist. We are celebrating a very big night tonight. I bowed my head slightly and took a step back, melting away into the crowd. My blood was running ice cold, but my heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic calm. She was celebrating her big night. She was reveling in the admiration and the applause. She had set the stage perfectly and gathered all the most important people in her world into one single room to witness her glory. She thought she was building a massive launch pad for her and Liam's new fraudulent fund. She had no idea she had actually just built a public execution block and handed me the axe. I walked back toward the kitchen to refill my tray, ready for the next phase of the evening to begin. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors and stepped back into the massive gourmet kitchen. Sylvia, the stressed catering manager, immediately shoved another heavy silver tray into my hands. This one was loaded with delicate crab cakes topped with caviar. She barked an order for me to get right back out to the main floor because the host was about to make a major announcement, and the guests needed to be completely satisfied. I adjusted the white apron around my waist, made sure my expression was totally blank, and walked back into the lion's den. The soft jazz music that had been playing through the hidden ceiling speakers suddenly faded into silence. My father Harrison stepped up to the grand marble fireplace, holding a crystal glass of imported scotch. He tapped the side of his glass with a silver spoon. The sharp, clinking sound cut right through the low murmur of conversation, instantly drawing the attention of every wealthy investor in the room. My father cleared his throat, puffing out his chest to maximize his presence. He thanked everyone for coming to their humble home tonight. Humble was a laughable word to describe a $3 million custom-built estate, but the crowd chuckled politely at his false modesty. He spoke passionately about the importance of legacy and the absolute necessity of building generational wealth within the Black community. He was setting the stage perfectly, playing the wise elder statesman to warm up the wallets of the audience. Then he transitioned into introducing his son-in-law. He called Liam a visionary, a man who understood the future of commercial real estate better than anyone else on the entire East Coast. Liam walked to the center of the living room, buttoning his cheap navy suit jacket with an arrogant swagger. He flashed a brilliant white smile that looked less like a greeting and more like a predator showing its teeth. Vanessa stood right beside him, wearing her deep burgundy silk gown, looking exactly like the perfect supportive billionaire wife. Liam started his pitch, and it was a masterclass in absolute corporate garbage. He used every single obnoxious buzzword he could possibly think of. He talked about paradigm shifts, aggressive yield curves, and synergistic market disruptions. He told the room about his brand new commercial real estate fund, claiming he had just secured the exclusive rights to develop a massive stretch of prime waterfront property in downtown Baltimore. He said he was only opening the fund to a select group of elite investors tonight because he wanted to keep the wealth concentrated among close friends and family. The minimum buy-in, he announced without blinking an eye, was $500,000. A low murmur rippled through the room. The investors looked highly interested but cautious. These were smart, successful people who did not just throw $500,000 at anyone with a slick PowerPoint presentation. Liam knew he had to close the deal with a show of absolute, undeniable financial strength. He needed a prop to prove that he was not just talking big, but living big. So he used his ultimate weapon. He opened his arms wide, gesturing to the towering ceilings, the pristine marble floors, and the massive crystal chandeliers hanging above their heads. He told the crowd to just look around them. He said that when he and Vanessa first started out in the business, people doubted their aggressive strategies. But through smart investments and ruthless market execution, they built an empire. He explicitly stated, looking right into the eyes of the wealthiest men in the room, that he and Vanessa purchased this $3 million estate in straight cash as a simple retirement gift for his in-laws. He let that lie hang in the air for a moment, letting the sheer magnitude of the claim sink in. Then he delivered his closing hook. He said if he could generate enough liquid capital to buy a luxury mansion outright. Just imagine the kind of aggressive returns he could generate with their investment capital. I stood near the back wall holding my heavy tray of crab cakes. My face remained a perfectly blank mask, but my mind was rapidly calculating the severe legal statutes he was actively violating. It is one thing to lie to your family about being rich to protect your fragile ego. It is an entirely different thing to stand in front of a room full of accredited investors and use a property you do not own as collateral evidence to solicit millions of dollars. That crosses the line from pathetic bragging straight into felony securities fraud. By actively lying about his assets to induce financial investments, Liam was committing federal wire fraud right in my living room. Liam went on to say that the subscription paperwork for the new fund was sitting on the dining room table ready to be signed tonight. He claimed he already had $3 million in committed capital and was just looking to close the final round before midnight. It was a classic high-pressure sales tactic designed to create a false sense of urgency and back it up with a fake display of immense wealth. Vanessa stepped forward, resting her manicured hand gently on Liam's shoulder to seal the deal. She told the crowd that partnering with her husband was the absolute smartest financial decision she ever made in her entire life. She claimed she trusted him with her entire life savings, and it paid off 100 times over. She looked directly at the older wealthy women in the room, telling them that this was their golden opportunity to secure their families' financial futures forever. I watched as several of the older businessmen nodded, pulling out their expensive fountain pens and making their way toward the dining room table. They were actually buying it. The illusion was so complete, the venue so intimidatingly expensive, and my parents' endorsement so authentic that their natural business instincts were being completely overridden by the desperate desire to be part of the next big thing. I knew I could not let anyone actually sign those contracts or wire a single cent to Liam's fraudulent accounts. If they transferred money, the situation would escalate into a massive federal crime scene that could potentially drag my anonymous blind trust into a lengthy legal subpoena process. I needed to act and shut the entire production down immediately. But before I could even take a step forward to interrupt the pitch, the universe decided to accelerate my timeline for me. A wealthy older woman standing in the front row turned around to grab a napkin from a passing server. She missed the server, and her eyes scanned the back of the room, landing directly on me. She narrowed her eyes, squinting slightly as if trying to place my face. I recognized her instantly. It was Mrs. Calloway, an old family friend who had known my parents for decades. And in that exact moment, she recognized the disgraced youngest daughter hiding behind a cheap polyester apron. "Kiara Harrison, is that you?" Mrs. Calloway asked, her voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the crowded room. The older woman stepped away from the main group of investors and walked directly toward me, her eyes wide with absolute shock. She was wearing a heavy pearl necklace that clicked softly as she moved. "I have not seen you since you left for college," she said, looking at my cheap polyester uniform with complete bewilderment. "Why in the world are you dressed like a server at your own parents' house?" Before I could even open my mouth to respond, my mother materialized out of nowhere. Brenda had been hovering near the dessert table, but she practically sprinted across the marble floor the moment she heard Mrs. Calloway speak my name loudly. My mother grabbed Mrs. Calloway by the arm, her face tight with momentary panic, but she quickly plastered on a look of tragic maternal sorrow. She was an absolute master of emotional manipulation, and she knew exactly how to spin this potential disaster into a public relations victory for her favorite daughter. "Oh, Helen," my mother sighed, shaking her head dramatically. "I was hoping to avoid this deeply embarrassing conversation tonight, but I suppose the truth always comes out eventually." Mrs. Calloway looked back and forth between me and my mother, completely confused. "Truth what?" "Truth, Brenda," she asked. "I thought Kiara was running some sort of successful technology company out in California. Harrison always told everyone she was doing exceptionally well for herself. My father only said that to protect her fragile pride." My mother lied smoothly, her voice rising in volume intentionally, so the surrounding investors could clearly hear her. She wanted an audience to validate her cruelty. The heartbreaking truth is, Kiara was fired from her job yesterday. It was a case of total professional incompetence. She lost her tiny apartment and came crawling back home to us with absolutely nothing to her name. We are completely heartbroken for her, but we are trying our best to practice tough love. The murmur of the crowd noticeably shifted. The wealthy men and women, who had just been reaching for their checkbooks to invest in Liam now, turned their full attention to the tragic failure standing by the kitchen swinging doors. I stood perfectly still, holding the heavy silver tray of crab cakes, keeping my face completely devoid of any emotion. I let the heavy silence stretch out, allowing my mother to dig her own grave deeper and deeper with every single word she spoke. "She begged us for money," my mother continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy and loud condescension. "But Vanessa and Liam work far too hard for their wealth. We could not just give her a handout and reward her laziness. So Vanessa, out of the absolute goodness of her pure heart, hired her to work with the catering staff tonight. She is literally working to earn her dinner. We are hoping the manual labor will finally teach her the value of a hard-earned dollar." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. My mother was standing in a house that I fully paid for, drinking expensive champagne that I bought, and loudly proclaiming to the elite of Maryland that I was a destitute failure, eating their leftover scraps. Several of the powerful investors shook their heads, looking at me with a mixture of profound pity and deep disgust. They whispered among themselves, entirely fooled by the theatrical performance of my mother. Vanessa saw the commotion from across the room and smoothly detached herself from the group of investors near the dining table. She glided across the pristine marble floor, her deep burgundy silk dress sweeping elegantly against the expensive Persian rugs. She positioned herself right next to my mother, placing a comforting, delicate hand on her shoulder. She looked at me with an expression of performative saintliness that made my stomach physically turn. "It is okay, Mom," Vanessa said, her voice projecting perfectly across the quiet room. "We do not need to air all of her dirty laundry in front of our esteemed guests." She looked over at Mrs. Calloway, giving the older woman a brave, long-suffering smile. "I always have to clean up my little sister's messes, Helen. It is just the heavy cross I bear as the older and more responsible sibling. Kiara has always struggled to find her footing in the real world. She just does not have the sharp business acumen or the relentless drive that Liam and I have. But family is family. I could not just let her starve on the dangerous streets. Giving her a few hours of minimum wage work was the absolute least I could do to keep a roof over her head tonight." Mrs. Calloway let out a soft sigh of deep admiration, placing her hand over her heart. "You are a true angel." "Vanessa," the older woman said, her voice filled with respect, "not many people would be so generous to someone who threw their entire life away. Your parents must be so incredibly proud of the remarkable woman you have become." "Oh, we are," my mother chimed in, beaming with absolute pure pride. "She is the solid rock of this entire family." Liam walked over, joining the circle of public humiliation. He looked down at me, his chest puffed out with arrogant triumph. He desperately needed to assert his dominance in front of the wealthy men he was trying to scam. "Make sure you keep those appetizer trays full, Kiara," he barked, treating me exactly like a stray dog that had wandered into his pristine mansion. "We have very important people here tonight who are actually contributing to society. Try not to drop anything clumsy. We really do not want to deduct the cost of broken crystal from your pathetic little paycheck." A few of the investors chuckled at his cruel joke, finding humor in my supposed poverty. I looked around the tight circle at the faces of my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. They were completely intoxicated by their own perceived power. They thought they had finally put me in my proper place. They thought they had successfully and completely stripped me of my dignity in front of the most powerful people in the state. They were using my manufactured humiliation to aggressively elevate their own fake status. I did not break eye contact with Vanessa. I did not cry, and I did not run away like the frightened little girl they always wanted me to be. I stood tall, feeling the solid weight of the floor beneath my feet, the floor that I legally owned. I simply lowered the silver tray, placing it quietly onto a nearby marble side table. I reached behind my back and slowly untied the tight knot of the cheap polyester apron. The room was still buzzing with their cruel laughter and their arrogant superiority. But the time for silent observation was officially over. The trap was fully loaded, and it was time to pull the trigger. The cheap white fabric of the apron pooled around my scuffed sneakers. I stepped out of it, leaving the symbol of their manufactured humiliation on the pristine marble floor. I did not rush, and I did not speak immediately. I let the heavy silence that followed my actions stretch out until it became deeply uncomfortable for everyone watching. My mother opened her mouth to scold me, but I simply held up a single commanding finger and she snapped it shut. I stepped forward, walking directly into the center of the luxurious living room. The wealthy investors parted slightly, allowing me to enter their elite circle. I kept my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, and my gaze locked directly onto Vanessa. My sister was still standing next to Liam, but the smug, triumphant smile on her face was beginning to show microscopic cracks. She did not expect me to stand my ground with the cold, calculating calm of a predator that had just cornered its prey. "What are you doing?" Vanessa hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Pick that apron up right now and get back into the kitchen before I have security throw you out. You are ruining the most important night of my career." I just smiled at her. It was a deadly innocent smile. The kind of smile you give someone when you know exactly how the game ends and they do not even realize they are playing. "You have a truly remarkable career, Vanessa," I said, my voice smooth and projecting clearly across the massive space. "You just told all these incredibly wealthy and successful people that you bought this $3 million estate outright with cash. You used this exact house to prove your immense financial liquidity and to convince these people to invest millions into the new commercial real estate fund managed by your husband." Liam puffed out his chest, stepping slightly in front of his wife. "That is exactly right," he barked, his face turning a dark, angry red. "We bought this massive house with our own hard-earned money. Now back off, Kiara, before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing. You do not belong here." I ignored Liam completely. My eyes remained entirely locked on my older sister. I took one more step closer to her, invading her pristine personal space. "That is a beautiful story, Vanessa." I continued, my tone remaining perfectly polite and deeply curious. "The self-made millionaire daughter, rewarding her hard-working parents. It is incredibly inspiring. But since you are standing here pitching a real estate investment fund to a room full of developers, I figured you would not mind answering one very simple technical question about your own real estate portfolio." Vanessa swallowed hard. The skin around her perfectly contoured eyes tightened. "What kind of question?" She snapped, a slight tremor, betraying her rising panic. "I do not have to answer anything from a jealous, unemployed failure." I tilted my head, keeping the smile fixed on my face. "You said you bought this house," I repeated slowly, enunciating every single syllable. Buying a $3 million property in cash requires significant legal paperwork. Wealthy people rarely buy estates under their personal names due to tax liabilities. They use corporate entities. Since you personally signed the closing documents and wired the millions of dollars to the escrow account, can you name the exact limited liability company or blind trust listed as the legal owner on the property deed?" The entire room went completely dead silent. The soft jazz music seemed to fade away into absolute nothingness. The wealthy investors who built their careers on property law instantly recognized the validity of my question. It was fundamental information that any genuine property owner would know without a second's hesitation. They all turned their eyes toward Vanessa, waiting for her to deliver the simple corporate name. Vanessa froze. Her jaw dropped slightly, and her eyes darted frantically around the room. She looked at our mother, who was staring back at her with total blind faith. She looked at Liam, who was waiting for her to proudly announce the name of their supposed holding company. But Vanessa had absolutely nothing to say. She had never seen the deed to the house. It is?" she stammered. her voice cracking under the intense weight of dozens of expectant stares. She cleared her throat, trying desperately to gather her thoughts, but her mind was entirely blank. "It is just a private holding company," she deflected, waving her hand dismissively. "My lawyers handled all the boring paperwork. I do not bother memorizing the random letters and numbers they use for tax purposes. I focus on the big picture, Kiara." The investors exchanged highly skeptical glances. "A private holding company is not a random string of letters and numbers," I pointed out calmly, my voice ringing with undeniable professional authority. "You are asking these people to hand your husband millions of dollars for a commercial fund based entirely on your proven track record of real estate acquisition. But you cannot even name the legal entity that owns the ground you are currently standing on. You are out of line!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. She took a step back, her hands shaking as her glamorous facade began to crumble. "How dare you interrogate me like a criminal? You are just deeply jealous of my success. Mom, tell her to stop. Liam, make her leave right now." She was entirely defensive, her body language screaming guilt to every seasoned businessman in the room. She thought attacking my character would distract them from the massive gaping hole in her story, but I was not going to let her hide behind manufactured victimhood. I reached into the pocket of my jeans, my fingers wrapped around the smooth, cold metal of my smartphone. It was time to show the room exactly who the real visionary was. I pulled my smartphone from the pocket of my faded jeans and kept my eyes locked on my sister. The massive living room was equipped with a state-of-the-art smart home entertainment system. Right above the grand marble fireplace where my father had just delivered his arrogant speech was an 85-inch flat-screen television playing a loop of meaningless abstract art to provide ambient lighting for the gala. I swiped down on my screen and hit the screen mirroring icon. A soft chime echoed through the hidden ceiling speakers, abruptly cutting off the smooth jazz music. The giant television screen above the fireplace blinked black for a fraction of a second before suddenly illuminating the entire room with the bright white display of my personal internet browser. The sudden shift in lighting and the sharp sound drew every single pair of eyes in the room directly to the screen. The wealthy investors, the real estate developers, and even the catering staff stopped whatever they were doing and turned to watch. Liam took a step backward, looking up at the television with a deep expression of utter confusion. Vanessa let out a small, breathless gasp, her hands balling into tight fists at her sides. I did not break my stride. I tapped the screen of my phone and opened the official website for the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation. The official government seal appeared in massive high definition right above my father's head. The room remained completely silent as the heavy weight of what I was doing began to dawn on the experienced business professionals surrounding me. They all knew exactly what website I had just loaded. Anyone who dealt in commercial real estate or private equity knew that the state property tax database was the ultimate undeniable source of absolute truth. "What are you doing?" Liam demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sudden terrifying doubt. "Turn that off right now, Kiara. You are trespassing and hacking into our network." I ignored his pathetic, empty threats. I tapped the public property search bar on my phone and slowly typed in the exact address of the $3 million estate we were currently standing inside. Every single keystroke was mirrored perfectly on the giant screen for the entire room to witness. The wealthy developers leaned forward slightly, their eyes narrowed in intense professional curiosity. My mother Brenda pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "Stop it!" Vanessa shrieked, lunging forward to grab my arm. Her perfect emerald green dress swished violently around her legs, but before she could even reach me, I hit the search button. The database loaded instantly. The massive screen updated to show the official legal deed and property tax record for the estate. There were no complex legal loopholes or hidden documents. It was a simple, straightforward government record displayed in massive black text on a stark white background. I looked up at the screen and then turned my gaze to the audience of elite investors. Right there at the very top of the document listed under the primary legal ownership field was a single corporate entity. It did not say Vanessa. It did not say Liam. It did not say my parents' names. Read it, I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings with absolute icy authority. I looked directly at the prominent commercial developer from Baltimore, the man Liam had been desperately trying to impress earlier in the evening. Read the name of the legal owner registered on the deed to this property. The developer adjusted his expensive glasses and squinted at the massive screen. His voice was deep and entirely devoid of any sympathy when he spoke. It says K-Sec Holdings Limited Liability Company. He read aloud, the words falling like heavy concrete blocks into the dead silence of the living room. My mother let out a soft, confused whimper, putting a trembling hand over her mouth. My father, Harrison, stared at the screen as if it were written in a foreign language, his jaw slightly unhinged. Vanessa looked like she was going to be physically sick. The vibrant color completely drained from her carefully contoured face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. K-Sec Holdings, Liam whispered, his voice cracking. What is that? What does that mean, Vanessa? You told me you bought this house in cash. You told me the deed was in a private trust under your name. She lied to you, Liam, I said, turning my full attention to the broken man in the cheap suit. She lied to you just like she lied to our parents, and just like she was trying to lie to every single investor in this room tonight. Vanessa has never owned a single piece of real estate in her entire life. She does not have millions of dollars in liquid capital. She is a fake lifestyle coach who takes pictures in a house she does not own to sell an illusion she cannot afford. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Vanessa, who was now physically shrinking away from me. K-Sec Holdings is a private blind trust. I stated, my voice rising slightly so there would be absolutely no misunderstanding among the powerful people in the room. The K stands for Kiara, and the SEC stands for cybersecurity. I established that trust fund exactly 5 years ago using the profits from my venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. I used that trust to purchase this $3 million estate outright. I am the actual owner of this house. I am the sole managing director of K-Sec Holdings. I am the one who pays the massive property taxes every quarter. I am the one who pays for the landscaping, the utilities, and the structural maintenance. The absolute shock that ripped through the room was palpable. Several of the wealthy women gasped out loud, covering their mouths in pure disbelief. The investors who had been holding their expensive fountain pens ready to sign Liam's fraudulent contracts slowly capped their pens and slipped them back into their tailored suits. The entire illusion of wealth and power that Vanessa and Liam had spent months carefully constructing was completely incinerated in less than 60 seconds. You are looking at the actual legal owner of this house, I declared, spreading my arms slightly to encompass the grand marble foyer, the towering crystal chandeliers, and the expensive Persian rugs. My sister did not buy this house to reward our parents. I bought this house so they could retire in comfort. I chose to do it anonymously because I knew my mother and father would never accept a gift of this magnitude from the daughter they always considered a massive failure. I wanted to protect their pride. I paused, letting the heavy, crushing reality of my words sink deep into the bones of my family. My father stumbled backward slightly, hitting the edge of a velvet armchair. His entire worldview, the absolute certainty that Vanessa was the savior and I was the burden, was fracturing into a million irreparable pieces right before his eyes. But Vanessa found out, I continued, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet tone. She discovered the anonymous trust, and instead of telling the truth, she decided to hijack my generosity. She claimed my money as her own. She used my house as a prop for her social media empire. And tonight, she allowed her desperate husband to use my property as fake collateral to commit federal wire fraud in front of a room full of accredited investors. The room erupted into a chaotic symphony of angry whispers and shocked exclamations. The trap had snapped completely shut. The golden child was dead, and I was the one holding the smoking gun. The heavy, crushing silence that followed my revelation did not last long. My mother, Brenda, was not a woman who surrendered easily, especially not when her entire pristine reality was collapsing around her. She lunged forward, pushing past the wealthy investors who were now looking at my family like they were carrying a contagious disease. Her face was flushed a dark, angry red, and the expensive diamond necklace she wore heaved with her rapid, panicked breathing. "You are a liar!" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a jealous, spiteful liar, Kiara. I do not care what that stupid computer screen says. You hacked into the system just to embarrass your sister in front of her friends." Liam immediately seized the pathetic lifeline my mother threw into the room. "Yes!" he shouted, looking around at the circle of investors with wild, desperate eyes. "She is a hacker. She told us earlier she lost her tech job. She is just projecting fake documents onto the screen to ruin our gala because she is incredibly bitter." "Vanessa, tell everyone she is lying to us." Vanessa tried to speak, but she was visibly hyperventilating. She nodded frantically, clinging to the arm of Liam as if it were the only solid thing left in the entire world. "Yes," Vanessa gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to maintain her composure. "It is a fake document. My personal lawyers hold the real deed in a private vault. She is just trying to destroy my brand because she has absolutely nothing of her own to be proud of." My mother stepped even closer to me, her eyes burning with absolute venom and blind maternal devotion. "You think you can just walk in here wearing a cheap maid outfit and convince these powerful people that you are some kind of secret millionaire?" She snarled, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "Vanessa is the one who takes care of this family. Vanessa is the one who sends us $15,000 every single month just for our living expenses. She pays for your father's luxury car leases. She pays for the expensive country club memberships. If you own this massive house, then explain exactly where all that cash comes from every month. You cannot explain it because you are a pathetic fraud." The wealthy investors murmured again, exchanging highly skeptical glances. A monthly cash allowance of $15,000 was a very specific detail. It implied a consistent and highly liquid cash flow. They looked back at me, waiting to see how I would counter this aggressive new claim. My mother stood tall, crossing her arms over her chest, completely convinced she had just checkmated me in front of the entire room. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. I simply let out a soft, weary sigh, feeling the cold satisfaction wash over my mind. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured, contrasting sharply against her hysterical screaming. "You do receive a wire transfer of exactly $15,000 on the first of every single month. The funds are deposited directly into the joint checking account you share with Dad. The transfers began exactly 36 months ago, right around the time Dad complained that his retirement pension was simply not enough to maintain your high society lifestyle." My mother looked slightly thrown off by my precise and intimate knowledge of her personal banking habits, but she quickly recovered her arrogant posture. "Exactly," she snapped, looking around the room to gather support. "Vanessa set up a recurring wire transfer from her business accounts to take care of us. She is a devoted and successful daughter, unlike you." I tapped the screen of my smartphone, which was still actively mirroring, to the massive television above the grand fireplace. The state property tax database vanished instantly. It was replaced by a high-definition scan of a certified corporate bank statement. The familiar logo of one of the largest private financial institutions in the world was displayed proudly at the very top of the bright white document. "Let us take a very close look at those devoted wire transfers," I suggested, gesturing gracefully toward the massive screen. The television displayed a highly detailed ledger of outgoing corporate transactions. I highlighted a specific recurring line item, causing it to glow bright yellow on the screen. The row clearly showed a transfer of exactly $15,000 processed flawlessly on the first of the month. Right next to the monetary amount was the destination routing number, and the account clearly labeled with the legal names of my parents. Vanessa let out a choked, agonizing sob, taking another step backward until her back hit the edge of a marble side table. She knew exactly what I was about to show them. She knew the walls were entirely closing in, and there was absolutely nowhere left to run. Read the origin account information I instructed, projecting my voice with lethal authority across the silent living room. Read the name of the generous benefactor who has been funding your entire luxurious life for the past 3 years. The Baltimore commercial developer who had read the deed earlier stepped forward once again. He adjusted his glasses and squinted at the massive screen, reading the fine print of the certified banking document. The origin account belongs to the KSEK Philanthropic Foundation. He read aloud, his deep voice echoing heavily in the quiet space. It is registered as a private charitable trust subsidiary. My mother stared at the glowing screen, her mouth hanging slightly open in pure shock. K-Sec, she whispered, the letters tasting like absolute ash in her mouth. Yes, Mom, K-Sec, I replied, stepping right up to her so she was forced to look directly into my cold, unblinking eyes. The anonymous charitable arm of my venture capital firm. 3 years ago, I realized you and Dad were drowning in massive credit card debt, trying desperately to keep up appearances with your wealthy friends. I knew if I offered you the money directly, you would reject it out of pure spite because it came from the daughter you considered a total embarrassing failure. So I set up a blind charitable trust to send you an anonymous living stipend every single month. I wanted you to have peace of mind. I wanted you to live comfortably without the heavy burden of financial stress. I turned my head, slowly locking eyes with my older sister. Vanessa was now physically shaking her hands, covering her mouth as thick black tears of ruined mascara streamed down her perfectly contoured face. But then Vanessa accidentally intercepted a piece of mail from the trust administrator. I continued, my voice slicing through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. She saw the anonymous wire transfers coming into your account, and instead of wondering who was actually taking care of her parents, she decided to despicably steal the credit. She told you she was the one sending the money. She used my silent generosity to aggressively elevate herself to the status of a living saint. She let you praise her, she let you worship the ground she walked on, and she never once contributed a single dime of her own money to this family. You are lying, my mother cried out, but her voice was incredibly weak, entirely stripped of its former aggressive confidence. It is a trick. Vanessa, tell her it is a trick. Tell me you send the money. But Vanessa could not speak a single word. The crushing weight of the absolute truth had finally paralyzed her vocal cords. The wealthy investors in the room looked at my sister with expressions of pure absolute disgust. Stealing credit for charitable funds to feed your own narcissistic ego was a severe moral crime that none of these seasoned professionals could possibly stomach. They saw Vanessa exactly for what she was, a hollow, desperate parasite, feeding entirely off the monumental success of the sister she treated like garbage. You have been living on my charity for years, Mom, I said, keeping my tone completely flat and emotionless. The expensive silk gown you are wearing tonight, the imported vintage champagne you are drinking, the luxury car Dad drives, it was all completely paid for by the computer degrees you mocked this morning. You called me a burden. You shoved a $50 bill into my chest and told me to go sleep in a cheap motel because you thought Vanessa was carrying this family. But Vanessa is nothing. Vanessa has nothing. I am the only reason you are not completely bankrupt and living on the dangerous streets. A collective gasp echoed through the massive living room. The wealthy investors and seasoned real estate developers who had spent the entire evening treating Vanessa like a visionary genius now looked at her as if she were a completely repulsive insect. The sudden sharp intake of breath from the elite crowd was the exact sound of my sister's pristine reputation shattering into a million irreparable pieces. I stood perfectly still, letting the undeniable weight of the truth settle heavily over the room. My mother Brenda stood frozen in place, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly as the horrifying reality began to slowly infiltrate her stubborn mind. For 3 entire years, she had worshipped Vanessa. She had proudly told every single person at her exclusive country club that her eldest daughter was a self-made millionaire who loved her parents so much She bought them in a state and paid their monthly bills. She had used that manufactured reality to justify her absolute cruel treatment of me. And now she was standing in front of the most powerful people in Maryland, realizing that her golden child was nothing more than a highly manipulative thief. Let me explain exactly how she pulled off her little magic trick, I continued, my voice echoing with a cold, analytical precision that left absolutely no room for debate. 3 years ago, my legal team sent a standard compliance letter regarding the anonymous charitable trust to this exact address. It was a highly confidential document meant only for the primary beneficiaries. But Vanessa happened to be visiting that weekend. She checked the mail before you or Dad woke up, and she opened an envelope that was legally addressed to you. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft clinking of ice melting in the abandoned cocktail glasses. When Vanessa read that letter, she saw the massive account balances and the schedule for the recurring monthly wire transfers I explained, keeping my eyes locked onto my rapidly hyperventilating sister. Instead of telling you the truth, she saw the absolute perfect opportunity to elevate her fake brand. She immediately contacted the law firm managing my charitable trust. She falsely identified herself as your designated financial power of attorney, claiming that you and Dad were too elderly and technically illiterate to properly manage the incoming digital transfers. My lawyers, operating under strict anonymity protocols and simply trying to facilitate the charity, confirmed the routing details with her. From that exact moment forward, Vanessa inserted herself as the completely unnecessary middleman. She set up a fake payment portal routing my charitable funds through her empty business accounts for exactly 24 hours before they finally landed in your joint checking account. It was the absolute perfect crime. She got to hand deliver a $15,000 allowance to our parents every single month without ever working a single day for it. She used my silent financial sacrifice to buy your unconditional worship. Every time you praised her incredible business acumen, every time you bragged to your friends about your successful golden child, you were actually praising a hollow thief who was just passing out my hard-earned money and stealing all the credit. Vanessa pushed herself away from the marble side table, her face completely distorted by pure panic and absolute rage. She lunged into the center of the room, her heavy burgundy silk dress swishing violently across the Persian rug. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face, screaming at the absolute top of her lungs. "It is slander," Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing violently against the towering ceilings and completely destroying the sophisticated aesthetic she had spent months cultivating. "She is making the entire thing up to destroy me. Those bank statements on the screen are completely fabricated. She hired a graphic designer to make fake corporate ledgers because she is deeply obsessed with ruining my perfect life." The wealthy investors simply stared at her, their expressions hardening into absolute contempt. Seasoned business executives know exactly what a certified banking ledger looks like. They recognize the encrypted routing codes, the official transaction stamps, and the precise legal formatting that cannot simply be drawn up in Photoshop by a jealous sibling. They saw right through her pathetic, hysterical denials. I watched my sister absolutely unravel before my eyes. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to fall out of place, and her manicured nails dug painfully into the palms of her hands. She was pacing back and forth, looking desperately around the room for a single sympathetic face, but she found absolutely nothing but deep disgust. She turned towards Sylvia, the catering manager, who had barked orders at me all night and demanded that the catering staff physically remove me from the premises. But not a single person moved a muscle. Sylvia stood frozen near the swinging kitchen doors, her eyes wide with total shock, realizing she had been treating the actual billionaire owner of the mansion like a stray dog all evening. "You want to talk about slander?" "Vanessa?" I asked, my voice remaining incredibly soft, but cutting through her hysterical screaming like a freshly sharpened knife. Slander requires the statements to be legally false. But every single word I have spoken tonight is backed by heavily regulated federal financial documents. If you truly believe I am fabricating these certified banking records, then I strongly encourage you to call the police right now. Tell them your jealous little sister is committing massive document fraud. Let them bring in federal auditors to deeply examine your personal business accounts. Let them see exactly how much actual revenue your fake lifestyle coaching business generates. Vanessa stopped pacing abruptly. The threat of a genuine federal audit hit her like a massive bucket of freezing water. She knew with absolute certainty that if any government official actually looked into her financial books, they would find absolutely nothing but empty accounts, fake invoices, and a mountain of suffocating credit card debt. She opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but the words completely died in her throat. She just stood there trembling violently, unable to formulate a single coherent defense. My mother was shaking now, looking back and forth between me and Vanessa. The blind maternal devotion in her eyes was finally beginning to completely shatter, replaced by a creeping, terrifying realization of the truth. Vanessa. My mother whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the air conditioning. Vanessa, please tell me the truth right now. Did you intercept that mail? Did you pretend to send us her money this entire time? Mom, do not listen to her, Vanessa cried out, rushing over to grab our mother's hands in a desperate plea for loyalty. She is a deeply sick and jealous person. She has hated me since we were little girls because you and Dad always loved me more. She is just trying to tear our beautiful family apart with her sick lies. There is no family left to tear apart, Vanessa, I stated, simply walking closer to the terrified group. You already destroyed whatever was left of it when you decided to use my parents as ignorant pawns in your pathetic little vanity project. You stole my silent generosity and actively weaponized it against me. You let our mother stand in front of this entire room and publicly humiliate me for being poor while you were literally wearing a designer dress bought with my venture capital money. You are not a lifestyle coach, Vanessa. You are a complete and utter parasite, and everyone in this room finally sees exactly who you are. The heavy, crushing reality of my words hung in the air, but the most explosive reaction did not come from my parents or the wealthy investors. It came from the man standing completely frozen near the grand marble fireplace. Liam had been listening to every single word of my financial breakdown, and you could visibly see the exact moment the math finally connected in his desperate brain. The smug, arrogant Wall Street persona he had been wearing all evening melted right off his face, leaving behind nothing but the raw, terrifying panic of a cornered animal. He slowly turned his head to look at Vanessa, his eyes wide and completely unblinking. Vanessa, he said, his voice shaking so badly it barely sounded like him. Vanessa, tell me right now that she is lying. Tell me you have the money you promised me. Tell me the offshore accounts you bragged about are real. Vanessa reached out to touch his arm, her face a twisted mask of pure desperation. Liam, baby, please, she whispered frantically, trying to keep her voice down so the investors would not hear her collapsing marriage. Do not do this right now. We can fix this. We just need to get through tonight and get the signatures. We can still launch the fund. Get what signatures? Liam exploded, slapping her manicured hand away from his cheap suit jacket as if her touch physically burned him. His voice echoed loudly across the pristine living room, completely shattering whatever was left of their sophisticated gala. How are we supposed to launch a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate fund when the primary capital backer is completely broke? You told me you were old money, Vanessa. You told me your coaching business generated 7 figures a year and you had a massive family trust fund waiting for you. You told me you bought this absolute mansion with cash. My sister took a step back, her emerald silk dress tangling around her ankles. She looked at her husband with absolute terror, finally realizing that the man she thought would protect her was turning into her executioner. I had to exaggerate slightly, Liam, she stammered, tears ruining her expensive makeup. I had to build a strong brand to attract the right clients. Fake it until you make it right. That is what you always told me to do. You said we were a power couple. You have your massive real estate portfolio. We do not even need my money right now. You can fund the initial development phase yourself until my coaching business scales up. The sound that came out of his mouth was a horrific mixture of a laugh and a sob. It was the sound of a man watching his entire future evaporate into thin air. My real estate portfolio? He screamed, grabbing the sides of his head in absolute disbelief. What portfolio, Vanessa? I am completely bankrupt. My broker license was suspended 6 months ago because I could not even afford the basic renewal fees. My credit score is entirely destroyed. The only reason I was able to even rent this cheap suit and the luxury SUV sitting in the driveway was because you co-signed the rental agreements with your supposed pristine credit. The collective shock in the room deepened, reaching an entirely new level of absurdity. The wealthy Baltimore developers and seasoned angel investors who had just listened to his aggressive pitch now stared at the couple with their mouths hanging slightly open. The grand illusion was not just a one-sided lie. It was a massive, pathetic mutual scam. They had both aggressively lied to each other about their imaginary wealth. Liam married Vanessa because he thought she was an incredibly wealthy heiress who could entirely fund his failing commercial projects. Vanessa married Liam because she thought he was a high-rolling Wall Street mogul who could permanently finance her fake influencer lifestyle. Two completely broke, desperate frauds who accidentally married each other, hoping to secure a massive payday that absolutely never existed. Vanessa's eyes widened to the size of saucers. She looked at Liam as if he had just transformed into a completely different person right in front of her. "You are bankrupt," she shrieked, her voice pitching so high it sounded like scraping glass. "You told me you closed 3 commercial high-rises last year. You told me you were swimming in liquid capital. You promised me a life of absolute luxury, Liam. I married you because you were supposed to be my equal. How could you lie to me like this?" "How could I lie to you, Liam?" roared, stepping aggressively into her personal space. His face was bright red and thick veins bulged against his neck. "You are the one who stood in this multi-million-dollar mansion and claimed you owned every single brick. You are the one who paraded around wearing expensive designer dresses and drinking vintage champagne, making me believe I had finally married into elite black high society. You let me stand on that stage tonight and pitch a multi-million-dollar fund using a house you do not even own as collateral. Do you have any idea what you have done, Vanessa? You have made me a completely complicit accessory to massive federal securities fraud." Vanessa pushed him back, hitting his chest with her open palms. Her perfect facade was completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly truth of her extreme narcissism. "I did everything for this family," she screamed, crying hysterically as she looked around the room at the disgusted faces of the elite guests. "I built the perfect aesthetic. I gave you the wealthy image you needed to impress these people, Liam. You would be completely nothing without me. You are just a pathetic, broke loser who used me to get into this room." I watched the vicious internal conflict erupt right in the middle of my pristine marble living room. I did not intervene and I did not say a single word to stop them. They were tearing each other apart piece by piece, publicly executing their own marriage in front of the most powerful people in Prince George County. The investors who were supposed to hand them millions of dollars were now watching them like they were an incredibly tragic reality television show. The entire room was witnessing the spectacular, highly entertaining collapse of a completely fraudulent empire. They were digging their own graves with every single hysterical insult they hurled at each other, and I was just standing there, enjoying the absolute perfect silence of my total victory. Liam and Vanessa continued to scream at each other, their voices growing incredibly hoarse as they completely dismantled their fake marriage right in front of the wealthy elite. I slowly turned my back on their pathetic display. My business with them was effectively over. They had destroyed each other entirely on their own, and they were now drowning in a toxic mess of their own creation. I shifted my gaze toward the two people who were actually responsible for cultivating this toxic environment in the first place. My mother and father were standing perfectly still near the edge of the grand Persian rug. My father, Harrison, looked like he had aged 20 years in the past 10 minutes. His broad shoulders were deeply slumped, and the arrogant, imposing posture he usually carried himself with was completely gone. He looked like a deflated balloon. My mother Brenda was clutching her expensive diamond necklace, staring at me with eyes full of sheer, unadulterated terror. They had just watched their precious golden child fall completely from grace, and now they had to face the daughter they had so casually thrown away like absolute garbage. I walked slowly toward them, stopping just a few feet away. The elite guests in the room, sensing another massive shift in the power dynamic, immediately quieted down. Even Liam and Vanessa stopped their hysterical screaming, turning to watch the final execution. I reached deep into the pocket of my faded denim jeans and pulled out the crumpled $50 bill my mother had violently shoved into my chest just a few hours ago. I smoothed out the wrinkled green paper between my fingers, holding it up under the bright light of the crystal chandeliers, so every single wealthy investor in the room could see exactly what it was. This morning you stood on the front porch and told me I was a useless failure. I said, my voice perfectly level but carrying an immense crushing weight. You looked me right in the eyes and told me to go sleep in a cheap, dangerous motel because this massive house could not possibly carry another financial burden. You told me that Vanessa worked far too hard to support this family, and you absolutely refused to let me drag your precious golden child down. My mother flinched, as if I had physically struck her across the face. She opened her mouth to offer some kind of pathetic excuse, but her vocal cords were completely paralyzed. She just stared at the crumpled $50 bill, trembling violently. I let the green paper slip from my fingers. It fluttered slowly through the air and landed silently on the pristine marble floor right next to the discarded cheap white catering apron. You called me a burden, Mom? I continued, my voice slicing cleanly through the dead silence of the living room. But clearly you are completely terrible at basic mathematics. So let me break down the exact numbers for you right now as the chief executive officer of a highly successful venture capital firm. Let us do a full forensic audit of your luxurious life. My father swallowed hard, a thick bead of cold sweat rolling down the side of his face. He was a man who prided himself on his financial image, and he was about to be mathematically destroyed in front of his wealthy peers. For the past 5 years, I have quietly funded every single aspect of your extravagant existence, I stated, keeping my eyes locked on their terrified faces. If we exclude the massive $3.2 million initial cash purchase of this physical real estate, let us just look at the raw operating costs. The property taxes, the structural maintenance, and the premium landscaping services required to keep this estate looking perfect for your country club friends cost exactly $65,000 every single year. I pay that directly from my corporate accounts without ever asking you for a dime. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, watching them shrink away from me. Then there are the luxury vehicles. Dad, you drive a custom-leased Mercedes-Benz SUV to your golf tournaments, and Mom, you drive a brand-new Range Rover to your expensive luncheons. The heavy down payments and the massive monthly lease installments for both of those vehicles are paid directly from a corporate shell account that I fully control. That is another $90,000 in pure liquid cash that I spent just so you could look rich sitting in local traffic. The wealthy Baltimore developers and seasoned investors in the room shook their heads in absolute disbelief listening to the staggering financial breakdown. And finally, we have the famous monthly living allowance, I said, gesturing broadly around the room. $15,000 a month wired directly into your joint checking account so you can buy expensive silk dresses and imported vintage champagne. $15,000 a month for 36 consecutive months totals exactly $540,000. I paused, letting the massive figures hang heavily in the quiet air. My parents looked completely suffocated by the numbers. They had absolutely no idea the sheer magnitude of the wealth they had been casually burning through. If we add up the taxes, the luxury car leases, and the monthly cash allowance, the total liquid capital I have spent simply keeping you two comfortable and maintaining your completely fake high society image comes to exactly $1.8 million. I announced the final number ringing out with absolute devastating clarity. $1.8 million out of my own pocket just to make sure the people who gave birth to me never had to struggle for a single day. I stared directly into the horrifyingly blank eyes of my parents. The ultimate realization of what they had done was finally crashing down on them with the force of a freight train. They had worshipped a daughter who stole from them, and they had aggressively banished the daughter who silently gave them the entire world. "You said you could not carry me," I asked, my voice dropping into a lethal, icy whisper that carried perfectly across the dead silent room. "I have carried you with $1.8 million while you worshipped a thief." My parents fell into a horrified, paralyzed silence. Neither of them could move a single muscle. My father stared blindly at the marble floor, his entire legacy and ego completely eradicated. My mother looked like she had stopped breathing altogether, her face entirely drained of blood. The sheer magnitude of my financial sacrifice had completely crushed whatever remaining pride they had left. They had treated the person paying for their entire beautiful world like absolute garbage. They had traded their loyal, generous daughter for a completely fake illusion. And now, standing in the middle of the smoking ruins of their destroyed reputation, there was absolutely nowhere left for them to hide. The absolute silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bone, but I was not entirely finished delivering the truth. Humiliation is a very powerful weapon, but it is not a legal consequence. My parents were standing there completely broken by the mathematical reality of my financial sacrifice, but Liam and Vanessa were still breathing. They were still standing in my living room, completely unaware of the massive legal trap that was about to snap shut around their ankles. I turned my attention away from my shattered parents and looked back at my older sister and my cheap brother-in-law. They had stopped screaming at each other and were now watching me with pure, unadulterated dread. They thought the worst part of the evening was over. They thought being exposed as broke frauds was the absolute rock bottom. But I was a forensic auditor, and I never stopped digging until I hit the very foundation of a crime. I reached into the pocket of my jeans one last time and tapped the screen of my smartphone. The certified bank ledgers that had just destroyed my mother's worldview vanished from the massive television screen above the fireplace. The screen flickered for a brief second before projecting a highly complex legal document heavily stamped with official banking seals and notary signatures. A loud collective gasp rippled through the room from the elite investors who instantly recognized the heavy legal formatting of a commercial lending agreement. "You see, Liam," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, mechanical precision. "When you stood on that stage 20 minutes ago and pitched your completely fake commercial real estate fund to these wealthy developers, you made a very critical error. You told them you needed millions of dollars in seed capital, but you also claimed you had massive personal liquidity." I was very curious about how a man with a suspended broker license and a completely destroyed credit score was managing to fund the catered caviar and imported champagne for this highly expensive gala tonight, so I ran a deep forensic background check on your recent financial activities. Liam physically recoiled as if he had been struck in the chest. His face turned the color of wet ash and his hands began to shake violently at his sides. Vanessa looked up at the massive screen, her eyes wide with a new kind of absolute terror. "This document is a commercial hard money loan agreement," I announced, projecting my voice across the living room, so every single seasoned investor could hear the exact details of the crime. According to this legally binding contract processed just 3 weeks ago, Liam and Vanessa secured a $500,000 high-interest cash loan from a private shadow bank in Baltimore. They used the cash from that loan to rent the luxury Porsche, to hire this expensive catering staff, and to create the absolute perfect illusion of extreme wealth for this party tonight. They needed to look rich so they could successfully scam all of you into giving them millions. A low, angry murmur began to build among the wealthy elite standing in the room. The prominent Baltimore developer, who had been the primary target of Liam's pitch, took a very aggressive step forward, his face dark with absolute fury. "But securing a $500,000 cash loan requires massive collateral." I continued, keeping my eyes locked entirely on Liam, and since we have already established that Liam and Vanessa are completely bankrupt, they had absolutely nothing of value to offer the bank. So they decided to use this $3 million estate as their primary collateral. The room went completely still again. The wealthy investors were doing the exact same mental math I had done earlier. They knew it was entirely impossible to mortgage a property you do not legally own. Liam let out a pathetic, choked sound, shaking his head frantically. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking into a completely pathetic whine. "Do not say it, Kiara. Please do not say it out loud. In order to secure the mortgage on a property owned by KSX Holdings, you needed the legal signature of the primary managing director," I stated, entirely ignoring his pathetic begging. "But since you had absolutely no idea that I was the managing director, you assumed it was just a faceless corporate entity that you could easily manipulate. So Vanessa used her fake position as my parents' financial representative to forge a completely fraudulent legal power of attorney document. You forged my signature, you forged the corporate seals, and you submitted those forged documents to a federally insured financial institution to steal $500,000. Vanessa collapsed onto her knees on the pristine marble floor. Her heavy burgundy silk dress pooled around her as she began to sob uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth in pure, absolute despair. She knew exactly what I was saying. She knew the exact legal definition of her actions. "You did not just lie to your family, Vanessa," I said, walking slowly toward her trembling form. "You committed massive aggravated identity theft. You committed federal bank fraud, and by transferring those stolen funds across state lines to pay for this fake gala, you committed federal wire fraud. You did not just ruin your brand. You completely destroyed your entire life, and you dragged your desperate, pathetic husband right down into the federal prison system with you." The reaction from the elite guests was absolutely instantaneous and incredibly violent. The wealthy Baltimore developer pulled his expensive smartphone from his tailored suit jacket and immediately began dialing his private legal counsel. The other powerful investors in the room followed suit, their faces twisted into masks of absolute rage and deep disgust. They had been invited to a high society gala, only to discover they were standing in the middle of an active federal crime scene, being actively solicited by two incredibly desperate felons. "We are leaving," the Baltimore developer announced, his deep voice completely shattering whatever remained of the sophisticated atmosphere. He looked directly at my father, who was still standing frozen near the Persian rug. "You invited us into your home, Harrison, to help your son-in-law steal millions of dollars from us. You paraded your completely fraudulent daughter around and let her lie to our faces. You are an absolute disgrace to this community. My lawyers will be contacting the federal authorities first thing in the morning to hand over every single piece of prospectus paperwork Liam gave me tonight. I will make absolutely sure you and your entire toxic family are completely blacklisted from every single financial institution on the East Coast." My father opened his mouth to apologize, but he was completely drowned out by the sudden chaotic movement of the crowd. The wealthy elite of Maryland were not just leaving, they were actively fleeing the massive estate. They shoved past each other, eager to completely distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Harrison family. The women grabbed their expensive designer coats from the coat check room, and the men marched aggressively toward the heavy mahogany front doors. The absolute panic in the air was thick and suffocating. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federal mortgage fraud investigation. My mother Brenda chased after them, her expensive high heels clicking desperately against the marble floors. "Helen, please wait!" my mother cried out, grabbing the arm of Mrs. Calloway, the older woman who had recognized me in the maid's uniform. "Please do not leave like this, Helen. We had absolutely no idea. We are completely innocent in all of this." Mrs. Calloway yanked her arm out of my mother's grasp with such violent force that my mother actually stumbled backward. "Do not ever speak to me again, Brenda," Mrs. Calloway hissed, her voice filled with pure concentrated venom. "You stood right there and publicly humiliated your own youngest daughter, who was secretly paying for your entire luxurious existence. You worshipped a criminal and you treated your actual savior like complete garbage. You are a deeply sick and completely toxic woman. You deserve absolutely everything that is about to happen to you." Mrs. Calloway turned her back and marched out the front door, leaving my mother weeping hysterically in the grand entryway. The catering staff, led by the highly stressed manager Sylvia, completely abandoned their posts. They dropped their heavy silver trays of caviar and champagne directly onto the pristine marble floors and rushed out the side doors, completely refusing to be associated with the unfolding disaster. The soft jazz music was completely gone, replaced entirely by the chaotic sounds of luxury vehicles starting up their engines in the driveway and speeding aggressively away from the estate. Within 5 minutes, the massive $3 million mansion was completely empty of all its elite guests. The grand, sophisticated investment gala had officially transformed into a desolate, silent graveyard of ruined reputations and completely destroyed egos. The pristine illusion of the golden child was officially dead, and the heavy, crushing weight of federal prison was actively hovering right above her head. I stood in the absolute center of the living room, entirely untouched by the massive destruction I had just unleashed. I was perfectly calm watching my toxic family drown in the massive tidal wave of their own pathetic greed. But the night was still not completely over. I had one final document left in my pocket, and it was time to absolutely finish the job. The absolute silence in the massive living room was only broken by the sound of my sister weeping and the soft dripping of spilled champagne falling from a nearby table onto the expensive Persian rug. The party was an absolute disaster zone. Half-eaten crab cakes were scattered across the floor, dropped by the catering staff as they frantically fled the house. Abandoned crystal flutes sat half-empty on every available surface, reflecting the bright light of the chandeliers. My mother Brenda was still kneeling in the grand entryway, her face buried in her hands, crying hysterically over the total loss of her pristine social standing. My father Harrison had not moved an inch. He was staring blankly at the wall, a completely broken man who had just watched his entire kingdom burn to the ground. Liam was hyperventilating near the fireplace, clutching his chest as the terrifying reality of federal prison began to squeeze the oxygen out of his lungs. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for any of them. I simply stepped over the discarded white catering apron and walked deliberately across the room, pushing through the heavy, swinging doors into the kitchen. The stainless steel industrial kitchen was completely abandoned. I walked past the massive preparation islands and opened the door to the walk-in pantry. Sitting quietly on the bottom shelf, hidden away from the catering staff, was the single luxury item I had brought with me from Silicon Valley. I reached down and picked up my genuine black matte Crocodile Hermes Birkin bag. The expensive leather felt incredibly familiar and deeply comforting under my fingertips. It was the absolute perfect symbol of the immense wealth and power I actually possessed. I walked back out of the kitchen and pushed through the swinging doors, stepping back into the ruined living room. The stark contrast of the incredibly rare $50,000 designer handbag resting against my faded denim jeans and cheap gray hoodie made Liam look up from his panic attack. His red-rimmed eyes widened slightly as his completely destroyed real estate broker brain correctly identified the massive value of the bag hanging effortlessly from my arm. He finally understood just how incredibly out of his league he truly was. I walked directly to the center of the living room and stopped right in front of the massive glass coffee table. Vanessa looked up at me from the floor, her face a complete, swollen mess of ruined makeup and deep despair. I unclasped the heavy gold hardware of the Birkin bag and reached my hand inside. "There is one final piece of business we need to conclude tonight," I announced, my voice completely calm and devoid of any lingering emotion. It sliced through the sound of their pathetic sobbing, commanding their absolute attention. I pulled a thick stack of heavy legal papers from the interior of my bag. The top page was adorned with several aggressive red stamps from the county court and a bold official seal. I held the document up for just a moment, letting the bright overhead lights illuminate the heavy black text before I tossed it onto the center of the glass coffee table. It landed with a loud, satisfying smack that made my father flinch. "What is that, my father?" Harrison croaked, his voice incredibly weak and rasping, as if he had not swallowed water in days. He took a slow, trembling step forward, terrified of what new destruction I had just placed in front of him. "That is an official court-ordered eviction notice," I stated, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my gaze completely unyielding. "It is already signed, heavily stamped, and fully authorized by a superior court judge in Prince George County." My mother let out a sharp, terrified gasp, scrambling up from the floor in the entryway and rushing back into the living room. "An eviction notice," she cried out, her voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "You cannot evict us, Kiara. This is our home. We have lived here for 3 years. You cannot just throw your own parents out onto the street. We are legally protected tenants. You have to give us at least 30 days. You would have 30 days if you were legitimate tenants in good legal standing," I corrected her smoothly, my tone dripping with absolute icy precision. "But since neither you, nor Dad, nor Vanessa ever signed a formal lease agreement with KSEC Holdings, you are legally classified as unauthorized occupants. And more importantly, the local housing statutes completely waive any standard 30-day grace period when the unauthorized occupants are actively engaged in massive criminal activity on the primary premises." I pointed a finger directly at Vanessa and Liam, who were both shaking violently. "By forging my corporate signature and using this exact property to secure a fraudulent $500,000 commercial loan, Vanessa and Liam committed a severe felony on this estate. My legal team submitted the undeniable proof of that massive fraud to the housing court judge yesterday morning. The judge immediately granted a completely expedited emergency eviction to protect the massive assets of my holding company." I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single member of my toxic family, locking them into the absolute terrifying reality of their situation. "You do not have 30 days, I announced, my voice echoing with total, unquestionable authority. "You have exactly 24 hours. Vanessa let out another blood-curdling scream, burying her face into her hands. "24 hours. My father whispered, his legs giving out completely as he collapsed onto an expensive velvet sofa. "Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to pack an entire massive house in a single day?" "You do not need to pack the house, Dad," I replied, completely ignoring his pathetic pleading. "Because you do not own a single piece of furniture in this house. Every single luxury item in this estate, the custom velvet sofas, the expensive Persian rugs, the massive televisions, the imported dining tables, and the modern art hanging on the walls was completely purchased by my corporate trust. The only things you are legally allowed to remove from this property are your personal clothing and your basic toiletries. Everything else stays exactly where it is." My mother began to hyperventilate, clutching at her chest as she looked wildly around the beautiful room. She was looking at the luxurious life she had aggressively flaunted to her country club friends, realizing she was about to leave it with absolutely nothing but a suitcase full of clothes. "You are leaving us with nothing," she sobbed violently, tears streaming down her face. "We have no money. We have nowhere to go. Liam and Vanessa are completely broke. You are making us entirely homeless." "I am not making you anything, Mom," I responded, my voice as cold and hard as solid concrete. "I gave you a $3 million estate and a massive monthly allowance. You are the ones who chose to spit in my face. You chose to worship a manipulative thief because she fit the perfect fake aesthetic you desperately wanted to project to the world. You let her steal my generosity, and you used it to actively humiliate me. You made your choices, and now you are completely out of my house." I tapped the heavy legal document resting on the glass coffee table. "Tomorrow evening, at exactly 8 o'clock, a private security firm will arrive at the front gates accompanied by the local county sheriff." I warned them, my tone leaving absolutely no room for any negotiation. "If any of you are still standing inside this house or anywhere on this physical property when they arrive, you will be immediately arrested for criminal trespassing. They will physically drag you out in handcuffs and leave you on the curb." Liam slowly lowered his head into his hands, completely paralyzed by the utter devastation of his life. He had lost his fake wealthy wife. He had lost his fake real estate fund, and now he was losing the fake mansion. He used to build his entire fraudulent identity. Vanessa was completely unresponsive. just a shaking puddle of ruined silk and desperate tears on the marble floor. My parents were violently sobbing, their entire world completely stripped away, leaving them with the exact same poverty they had mocked me for just a few hours earlier. I had successfully executed the absolute perfect corporate and personal destruction. The heavy, suffocating burden I had been carrying for my entire adult life was finally lifted off my shoulders. But they still had absolutely no idea that the legal nightmare I had constructed for them was about to reach its terrifying climax. Because while the eviction notice completely handled the civil aspect of their betrayal, the criminal consequences were already speeding down the highway directly toward our front door. The crushing finality of my deadline hung in the stale air of the ruined living room. My father, Harrison, was the first one to completely break. The arrogant patriarch who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was not smart enough or driven enough slowly slid off the expensive velvet sofa. His knees hit the pristine marble floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. He did not even try to maintain his dignity. He crawled forward across the Persian rug, his hands reaching out toward my scuffed sneakers. "Kiara, please," my father wept, his broad shoulders shaking violently. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We gave you life. You cannot just throw your own flesh and blood out onto the street like discarded trash." My mother, Brenda, immediately followed his lead. The woman who had proudly shoved a $50 bill into my chest just hours earlier now threw herself onto the floor right next to my father. Her expensive designer gown soaked up the spilled champagne as she dragged herself toward me. She grabbed the hem of my faded denim jeans, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching the cheap fabric like it was her only lifeline. "Oh, my sweet girl," my mother sobbed, her voice entirely stripped of its former arrogant venom. "I am so sorry, Kiara. I was so blind. Vanessa manipulated us. She lied to us and poisoned our minds against you. You know I always loved you the most. You are my youngest baby. Blood is thicker than water, Kiara. You have to forgive us. The Lord commands us to forgive our family." I looked down at the two pathetic figures groveling at my feet. It was the most spectacular 180-degree attitude shift I had ever witnessed in my entire life. Just a few hours ago, they were completely willing to let me freeze in the dark because they thought I had absolutely no financial value to them. They treated me like a repulsive disease when I was wearing a cheap polyester catering apron. But the exact second they realized I was the actual billionaire holding the keys to their luxurious kingdom, they suddenly remembered how to be loving parents. They weaponized the concept of blood ties and religious forgiveness only when their massive bank accounts and expensive country club memberships were violently threatened. "Blood does not excuse abuse, Mom," I stated, my voice perfectly level. "Blood does not give you a free pass to exploit me and humiliate me in front of the entire county. You do not love me. You love the massive house I bought. You love the luxury cars I leased for you. You love the $15,000 allowance I wired you every single month. You are not crying because you suddenly realized you were terrible parents. You are crying because the ATM machine just permanently locked you out," my mother wailed, burying her face against my shoes. "Please, Kiara," she begged hysterically. "We will change. We will kick Vanessa out. We will never speak to her again. Just let us stay in the house. We will do whatever you want." Vanessa heard her own mother completely turn against her, and she snapped. The golden child who had spent her entire life basking in their unconditional worship suddenly realized she was being aggressively thrown completely under the bus. She pushed herself up from the marble floor, her face a twisted mask of pure desperate rage. She did not attack our parents, though. She turned all of her explosive venom directly onto the man she had married. "This is all your fault!" Vanessa shrieked, lunging toward Liam. She pounded her fists against his cheap navy suit jacket, her emerald silk dress tearing slightly at the seam. "You ruined my life, Liam. You told me the commercial loan was perfectly legal. You told me we just needed temporary collateral to get the fund started. You forced me to forge those documents. You manipulated me into committing federal mortgage fraud." Liam grabbed her wrists completely out of patience and entirely out of love. He shoved her backward so hard she stumbled and fell hard against the heavy glass coffee table. "I forced you!" he roared, his face bright red with absolute fury. "You are the one who printed the fake power of attorney forms, Vanessa. You are the one who sat in the bank manager's office and lied straight to his face with a completely straight smile. You wanted that $500,000 so you could rent this stupid Porsche and buy your fake designer bags. Do not you dare try to pin this entire federal crime on me, you psychotic parasite." "I am a public figure," Vanessa screamed back, completely unhinged. "I have an empire to protect. You are just a failed broker with a suspended license. When the federal authorities get here, I am going to tell them everything was your idea. I will testify against you, Liam. I will tell the judge you emotionally abused me and coerced me into signing those papers. You stupid delusional woman." Liam laughed, a harsh, manic sound that echoed wildly through the massive room. "My signature is not on the fake corporate consent forms. Yours is. You forged your own sister's name because you thought you were completely untouchable. You are going to federal prison. Vanessa and I am going to make absolutely sure you take the entire maximum sentence." They were completely tearing each other to pieces. The fake power couple was now actively threatening to destroy each other in federal court just to save their own pathetic skins. My parents were still sobbing on the floor, begging for a financial mercy they absolutely did not deserve. The pristine $3 million estate had become a massive, toxic cage, and they were all violently turning on each other like starving animals. I stood completely still, observing the horrific chaos with absolute detachment. I did not need to raise my voice or defend myself anymore. The truth had done all the heavy lifting for me. I took a slow step backward, forcing my mother to release her desperate grip on my jeans. She slumped forward onto the Persian rug, her expensive diamond necklace scratching against the floorboards. "Dad," I said, looking down at the broken patriarch, "you told me to pursue a respectable profession. You told me I lacked the ambition to ever be successful. But here you are, crawling on your hands and knees, begging the daughter you despised to let you sleep in the house she owns. You threw away your dignity for a free ride. There is absolutely nothing respectable about you." My father squeezed his eyes shut, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "I was wrong, Kiara." He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "I was a foolish old man. I was blinded by vanity. Give me a chance to make it right. Let me be the father you always deserved." "It is far too late for that," I replied simply. "You had 32 years to be a father to me. Tonight was your absolute last test, and you failed it the exact second you handed me that catering apron. You made your bed, and now you are going to sleep in it. But you will definitely not be sleeping in it here." Vanessa was still screaming at Liam, threatening to call her massive internet following to destroy his reputation. Liam was shouting back, calling her a complete fraud and a federal felon. The noise in the living room was deafening, but to me it sounded exactly like absolute silence. The toxic chains that had bound me to this family for my entire life were finally permanently severed. My mother reached out again, her manicured fingers clawing desperately at the air, trying to grab the fabric of my jeans one last time. I calmly stepped back and coldly brushed her hands away. I did not want her toxic touch anywhere near me. I reached down to the floor where the crumpled $50 bill was resting near the discarded white apron. I picked it up, smoothing the wrinkled green paper between my fingers. I looked down at my weeping parents and my screaming sister. "This morning you told me this house could not carry another burden," I said, my voice slicing through their pathetic noise. "You handed me this exact $50 bill and told me to go find a cheap motel so I would not drag this family down." I let the bill slip from my fingers. It fluttered slowly through the heavy air, landing directly on the pristine marble floor right in front of my mother's face. "Use this to find a motel," I told them, staring directly into their terrified eyes. "Because as of this exact moment you are officially the burdens." My mother stared at the $50 bill as if it were a poisonous snake. The poetic justice of the moment was completely suffocating her. But before she could even formulate a single word of response, the quiet, affluent neighborhood was suddenly shattered by a deafening sound. The shrill, aggressive wail of police sirens pierced through the thick walls of the mansion. Red and blue flashing lights immediately flooded through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the ruined living room with a chaotic strobe effect. Liam completely froze, his head snapping toward the front of the house. Vanessa stopped her hysterical screaming, her jaw dropping in absolute terror. They had been so busy destroying each other that they completely forgot about the wealthy elite guests who had just fled the party. One of the seasoned bank representatives, who had been sitting in the front row during Liam's fraudulent pitch, had stepped out onto the driveway and immediately called the local authorities. He reported an active multi-million-dollar mortgage fraud happening in real time, and the police responded with overwhelming force. The sound of heavy tires screeching to a halt on the custom stone driveway echoed loudly. Heavy footsteps pounded onto the front porch. The consequences of their massive greed had finally arrived. The heavy mahogany front doors were aggressively pushed open. Half a dozen police officers swarmed into the grand entryway, their heavy boots echoing violently on the pristine marble floors. They completely ignored my weeping parents and marched straight toward the center of the living room. Liam did not even try to run. He just collapsed onto his knees, placing his hands behind his head as two officers grabbed his arms and forcefully yanked them behind his back. The loud metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like absolute poetry to my ears. Vanessa tried to back away, her emerald silk gown completely ruined as she hit the glass coffee table. "I am a victim!" she shrieked hysterically as a female officer grabbed her by the shoulder. "He made me do it. I am a famous influencer, you cannot touch me." The officer completely ignored her pathetic screaming, twisting her arms behind her back and securing her in handcuffs right alongside her fraudulent husband. They marched the fake power couple out of the massive living room. Vanessa was sobbing uncontrollably, dragging her feet as the officers escorted her toward the flashing police cruisers waiting outside. Liam looked like a completely hollow shell, staring blankly at the floor as his entire pathetic life evaporated. They were both heading straight to a federal holding cell to face years in prison for massive securities and mortgage fraud. My parents remained huddled together on the Persian rug, weeping violently into each other's arms. They were entirely alone, surrounded by the empty ruins of their fake high society lifestyle. The massive $3 million mansion they had used to elevate their fragile egos was about to be sealed shut, and they had absolutely nothing left to their names except the crumpled $50 bill resting on the floor. I did not offer them a final goodbye. I did not look back at their broken, sobbing figures. I simply turned around and walked out the front doors, stepping into the cool night air. The flashing police lights illuminated the stone driveway, but my eyes were focused entirely on the sleek black SUV, waiting quietly at the edge of the property. My private driver opened the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, leaving the chaos and the police sirens completely behind me. My private jet was waiting on the tarmac at the local airport, ready to fly me back to my real life in Silicon Valley. I leaned back against the plush seat, staring out the tinted windows as the mansion disappeared from view. I had finally shed the massive toxic weight of my family. I had completely destroyed their illusion and protected my own empire. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt absolute pure freedom. The most powerful lesson from this story is that biology does not give anyone the right to abuse, manipulate, or exploit you. True family is built on mutual respect, not toxic obligations or a shared last name. When relatives use guilt and public image to trap you, your greatest weapon is the undeniable truth. Keeping your composure, protecting your financial assets, and maintaining your independence will always be your strongest shield. Never let the fear of losing toxic people keep you from defending your inner peace. Your true worth is defined by your own resilience, never by their broken expectations. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering content.